Sil banned my son from her wedding. Because of his illness, so we left. But now she's telling everyone I was jealous. So, just 3 days ago, my family and I were at my sister-in-law Annie's wedding. Oh, by the way, Annie's 35. My husband, who's 42, and I, who's 40, have been together for what feels like forever. Almost 20 years, married for 17 of those. We've got two awesome kids, a 15-year-old son and a 12-year-old daughter. They're great kids, super well-behaved, and everyone just loves them. Which is why what happened recently is so baffling. A bit of a backstory. A couple of months ago, our son was diagnosed with narcolepsy. It really hit us hard, and we're still trying to get used to it. But he's on treatment now and doing well. We just want to make his life a bit easier. And he's kind of self-conscious about it, which is why we've been making a big effort to ensure he doesn't feel ashamed. When we initially told everyone about his diagnosis, folks were very supportive, including Annie. Now, Annie and I have never been super close, but we've always been civil, not that we had any real issues. We tried being friends at first, but we're just very different people. So we settled into a cordial relationship, which seemed to work fine since my husband's family is pretty tight-knit. Cut to her wedding day, just an hour before the ceremony, Annie comes up to me and says she'd rather my son not attend. She was worried he might doze off during the ceremony and didn't want any disruptions. I was stunned. I mean, the ceremony was only going to be an hour long, and my son had taken his medication, so the chances of him dozing off were slim. Even if he did, my husband and I would be there to handle it. Plus, all eyes would be on her, so would anyone even notice? But Annie was adamant. When she kept insisting, I got really upset and told her that if she didn't want my son there, then I wasn't interested in attending either. I mean, telling my son to stay in his room would just make things worse for him. So I went back to our hotel room and told my husband what had happened. He was furious and wanted to confront her, but I didn't want any drama right before the wedding. We talked it through and decided that if our son wasn't welcome, we'd just leave. After all, if she didn't want him at the ceremony, she should have just said from the start that kids weren't invited. It would have been easier to explain. So, we packed up our things and left without saying goodbye. Annie didn't contact us after our conversation, so it was clear she didn't care whether we stayed or left. But I guess she did care about her brother's absence, because half an hour before the wedding, she started calling him. My husband was driving, so I answered. She was furious and thought she was talking to her brother. She yelled about us checking out without telling her and claimed we were overreacting. She said what she had asked wasn't that harsh and that we should have talked to her before leaving, because now she had to explain why her brother wasn't at the wedding. So, she was telling him that it wasn't too late to come back and make it in time for the ceremony, and we could hash all this out later. I was about to tell her that it was actually me, not her brother, who was on the phone when she blurted out, "Don't let that wife of yours drag you away from your real family." That was it for me. I let her know straight away that it was me on the call, because her brother was driving, and she had been talking to me the whole time. At that moment, I realized how she truly felt about me, and I knew I definitely didn't want to be at her wedding. My husband and I were sure we were doing the right thing by leaving. She had insulted not just my son, but me too. I didn't even give her a chance to respond. I just hung up and blocked her. My husband was totally fine with that, so we kept driving home. He got a bunch of calls from his parents and some unknown numbers, but we ignored them all and kept going. Our kids were super confused, but we didn't explain anything to them and still haven't. I didn't want my son to feel even more self-conscious. Once we got home, we muted everyone and decided we wouldn't check any messages for a few days. Things had gotten way too intense and dramatic, and we didn't want to get sucked into the drama. But then the next evening, my in-laws showed up at our house, and man, they were beyond pissed. Saying they were mad would be an understatement. As soon as they came in, they started yelling at us, claiming I had sabotaged their daughter's wedding on purpose. I was totally shocked. I had always had a decent relationship with my husband's family. I wasn't super close to them, but that's just because I have my own boundaries. I thought they were fine with that, but clearly they weren't. Even after 20 years of marriage, they acted like they didn't know the first thing about me. They accused me of being jealous of Annie, their daughter, because they thought she was more successful than me, and her wedding was grander than mine. They couldn't have been more wrong. Annie runs a sauce business, and I work in publishing, two completely different fields. Even if you compare income, we're equally successful. I didn't need to bring her down to make myself feel better. I'm not insecure. As for her big wedding, she's 35 and well established. My husband and I got married young and were just starting out. Our parents offered to fund our wedding, but we invested the money into our future instead. We were totally happy with our small, intimate wedding. I couldn't believe they were implying I ruined Annie's wedding out of jealousy. That's just not who I am. Even if Annie didn't get that, I expected my in-laws to know better. I was overwhelmed when they started yelling that I had sabotaged everything and made the wedding all about me by overreacting. They demanded I apologize, saying I'd done it purely out of jealousy, which they had apparently told everyone at the wedding. They made up a story about me sulking at the rehearsal dinner and picking a fight with Annie, claiming I convinced my husband to walk out. This lie made me look terrible, and it pushed me over the edge. It was bad enough they made up a story to cover for Annie and paint me as the bad guy. When they said everyone believed their story and thought I was jealous and needed to apologize, I just felt awful. That's not who I am, and I felt so misjudged. I couldn't even defend myself. I just broke down in tears. My husband saw that his family had no respect for me, and when I started crying, he told them to get out. So here's the thing. We had this huge argument with my in-laws at our house because they were way out of line. My husband stood his ground, saying he'd call the cops if they didn't leave. Even on their way out, they kept saying that my husband shouldn't let me dictate his actions, claiming I was trying to pull him away from his family. That really got to me, and I ended up in tears. My husband had to spend a good half-hour comforting me before I calmed down. He reassured me that he didn't care what his family thought because he knows me well, and as long as we know the truth, the lies they've been spreading don't matter. Once I felt better, we planned to set the record straight on social media. But until then, he wanted me to relax and not worry about it. He believed his family was just being awful because they weren't used to me having boundaries. Then, yesterday morning, my mom called. While chatting, I told her about the whole mess with my in-laws. To my surprise, she didn't take my side. Instead, she pointed out that I should have tried harder to get along with them. She said that since my husband's family was close-knit, I should have made more of an effort to fit in instead of keeping to myself. She thought my behavior made it unrealistic for me to expect them to accept me as part of the family. This really upset me because I've never been rude to my in-laws. I just valued having my own space and didn't feel the need to be in constant contact or pretend we were best friends. Given our historically decent relationship, I didn't think this was a good enough reason for them to treat me badly. Feeling conflicted, I talked to my husband about what my mom had said. He, while respecting my mom, pointed out that she had a history of internalized misogyny and expected me to act like she did in her marriage. My grandparents had controlled my mom's life completely after I was born, making her quit her job and dictate her every move, with my dad just going along with it. My husband reassured me that I didn't have to live like that, and he certainly wouldn't expect me to. This conversation made me feel better, because I realized I wasn't at fault. My in-laws, on the other hand, had some pretty unrealistic expectations. They wanted us at every family dinner, which they hosted almost every weekend. We live in the suburbs, so driving to their place that often wasn't feasible, especially considering our kids and our own family time. Annie, who lived close by, could manage it, but our situation was different. They expected us to call every other day and spend hours on the phone, go on family getaways frequently, and so on. It was like they thought we lived in a sitcom, not the real world. So if their expectations weren't met, it's not our fault. They never really understood that we had our own family to take care of, and my husband didn't want to spend all his time with them either. After 20 years, they should have gotten the hint by now. So, what happened at the wedding had nothing to do with the rest of the family. And when I walked out, I wasn't even thinking about them. I did it for my son's sake, not to mess things up for her. But then, they started spreading lies about me, telling everyone some crazy story about why we left. It was clearly an attempt to ruin my reputation, and I couldn't just let that slide. So my husband and I decided to release a statement like we said we would. We made it clear that we don't care what the rest of the family thinks about us. Honestly, we really don't. But it was crucial for us to set the record straight because they shouldn't get away with lying about me. They had plenty of time to apologize, but they didn't, so we had to let everyone know the real reason we weren't at the wedding. This whole thing was more about my son than me, though. He picked up on our argument with the in-laws and figured out that his aunt probably didn't want him there, which made him feel really bad about himself. I wanted to make sure he knew it wasn't his fault. If anyone was to blame, it was his aunt and grandparents. Telling the truth seemed like the best way to handle that. Now that our statement is out there, my husband and I can finally breathe a sigh of relief. I don't know if people will believe our side or if it'll cause more drama, but it was important to us to let everyone know what really happened. We're glad we did it. So, an update. My in-laws haven't reached out, but my brother-in-law did. I wasn't surprised that Annie's husband apologized because he always seemed like a decent guy. Of course, Annie, thinking she's above us, couldn't be bothered to apologize herself, but her husband messaged us, apologizing on her behalf. We don't see it as an apology from her, but we appreciate his gesture. Interestingly, a bunch of relatives reached out to say they suspected something was off with the version of the story my in-laws were spreading. They didn't want to believe I was capable of being so vindictive and were waiting for our side. They didn't contact us sooner because they didn't want to stir the pot. But now that the truth is out, they're on our side. This reaction made me realize my in-laws had probably been lying, trying to manipulate us into thinking the whole family was against us, so we'd apologize to Annie. Their goal? Probably just to inflate their egos. I'm so glad I didn't apologize, and my husband and I didn't fall into their trap. Most of the family is with us, which means no one is talking to my in-laws or Annie. I don't want to sound vindictive, but they deserve it. I haven't spoken to my mom in a few days after we fought, but I might update her on what's happened so she realizes she was wrong too. I'm willing to forgive her, but when it comes to my husband's family, even if I forgive them, I'm not sure my husband will. Thanks so much for the kind words about our son. We're sure he'll get better with time, and your support means a lot to us. Update 3. Hey, I finally talked to my mom after almost 3 weeks of no contact. We're trying to sort things out. We both missed each other a lot. And since my dad passed away 6 years ago, I'm all she has. Neither of us wants to lose the other. She's willing to learn and change to be more sensitive to my feelings, and I'm going to stick by her as she tries. Old habits are hard to break, but I'm not giving up on her. I wish I could say the same about my in-laws, but they don't deserve a second chance. Since we made that post, most of the family is with us and ignoring the in-laws. From what I've heard, Annie even had a huge fight with her husband because he apologized to us, and she moved back with her parents for a few days before going back to him. Honestly, it sounds bad to say, but I hope that guy leaves and finds someone better, because my husband and I think he deserves it. He deserves better, no doubt about it. He seems like a pretty decent guy, and I'm sure it won't be hard for him to find someone better than Annie. But hey, that's their decision to make, and we're done meddling in their lives. We've gone completely no contact with them, blocking them everywhere we could. We even had a chat about what we'd say if they ever apologized. But my husband isn't up for talking to them right now, so even if they do apologize, we're keeping our distance. Honestly, it seems unlikely they'll apologize anyway. All they've done so far is mock us on social media. They've posted a bunch of jokes and memes about narcoleptic people, which I think is pretty insensitive. But whatever, that just shows their true colors, not ours. Our kids mean the world to us, and if his family can't respect that, we want nothing to do with them. Speaking of the kids, they've been really down lately. So, my husband and I decided we're heading out for a family getaway this weekend. It's something we desperately need because we've all been pretty stressed out. We definitely need a break. Family is everything, and we want to make the most of our time together before the kids grow up.